The Tower of Taal. Chapter 1. Stroika, an ancient city. Some even said it was the oldest of all in the country. It had stood against the harsh winds, the freezing winters, and the torrential rain for 5 centuries. It had stood against all invaders throughout turbulent times and been a peaceful home to its residents with its beautiful gardens and stoned walkways. The city was a major trading center for much of the surrounding country, with roads leading all the way to docklands in the Bay of Dreams. Merchants from all of the country's regions came to sell and buy everything from produce to weird and wonderful devices, and some even said magical potions and artifacts. Although the city was wealthy and had many grand buildings, towers, temples, and walkways leading to parks for the citizens to enjoy, many of the citizens led simple lives, content with what they had and the simple joys that family brings. The roads in Stroika were well constructed and allowed for the use of carts and horse-drawn vehicles. Paths on either side of the streets allowed for the safe travel of pedestrians while shopping or browsing the local businesses. Certain areas were closed off for use by street traders and auctioneers, and these were always the busiest parts of the city. These marketplaces were not just for trading, but also for street performers, artists, fortune tellers, and many other diverse forms of businesses and entertainment. On this day, acrobats amazed the audience with leaps, jumps, and rolls, each more daring than the last. A juggler threw fiery brands into the air before catching them as they fell and propelling them skywards once more. Vendors sold food to passers-by, and people haggled with fruiters and butchers. An old woman, clad in long swathes of silk, spread her cards on a table before her, occasionally flipping one over and speaking to her eager client. Children ran and played, their mothers watching from a distance as they gossiped and talked about their home lives. Musicians kept the crowds in good cheer, some stopping to dance to the merry tunes while others clapped along. The auctioneer today was Joshua, who had arrived from Londra a few months earlier. He called out to the bidders, encouraging them to make even higher offers as he demonstrated what his latest product, a carved box that could be held in one hand and that glowed green along its edges, could do. The citizens hardly noticed the sounds coming from outside the city walls, and they paid no attention to them. Perhaps they had become complacent over the years, secure in the knowledge that they were safe even in times of war. They never feared, as the city was well defended with its towers and its high, thick dual walls. No enemy had ever made it past the first wall, let alone the second. And so, their daily lives went on while the battle continued outside. They knew about the war from travelers and traders, but it had been, for a long time, hundreds of kilometers away. On hearing that the war was coming closer, the citizens blocked the entrances to the city and decided that once again they would wait until the war ended and things returned to normal. Stroika had not been involved in a war for 400 years. It considered itself neutral, and to date no one had ever attacked it in earnest, and those that had dared such a feat had given up without ever breaching the city's walls. Frederick had been married to Caro for 30 years. They both worked for local shopkeepers, earning a meager wage, but enough to provide them with a home and food on the table. Their children had grown and moved out, which had, as is normal, brought both joy and sorrow. There was joy that they had their home to themselves and did not have to take care of them, but sorrow for exactly the same reason as most parents would agree. Frederick's clothes, while old, were clean, and he presented himself at his best whether at home or out in the streets buying supplies. Caro wore a simple dress, plain in color but suited her figure. She wore no makeup. She did not need to, and Frederick could not help but smile as he felt himself extremely fortunate to have such a beautiful woman for his wife. A simple meal, even for an ordinary man, was laid before them. Frederick led his wife in prayer to the gods for the wonderful meal that had been provided to them. He took the bread in both hands and tore it in two, passing one piece to his wife. Then, cutting a thick wedge of cheese, he gave this to her as well. Meanwhile, she poured him a glass of hinga juice. This was the local wine, but it was very cheap due to the massive growth of the hinga berries in the region. They talked about their day, work, and the goings-on around them in the city as they always did, laughing at the funny parts while being more serious about work. And what a commotion there had been over a cart whose wheel had come away, and it had listed to one side, spilling its contents and enraging its furious driver. Caro mentioned that on her way home, she had seen a man trying to sell a strange box, and that she had been curious as to what it was but had not had time to stop and inquire further. Frederick suggested it was just another useless trinket that would be sold to some unsuspecting fool for a high price, and that it would have no use at all apart from as an ornament. Caro pursed her lips. "Yes, I suppose you are right, you usually are." This caused Frederick to laugh. He knew he was being teased, and it was part of what made them such a happy couple. Frederick looked into Caro's eyes the way he always did and saw them smiling back at him. He raised his wine glass up towards Caro to toast their love, but as he did so, his hand was shaking and wine spilled over the lip. "Are you okay, my love?" Caro asked. She was worried. Frederick was not getting any younger, and he had recently had a nasty fall. It was then that she noticed that it was not Frederick shaking, it was the room itself. The table and chairs were vibrating, and the floor itself now shook. Frederick ran to the window and looked outside. At first all he could hear was a low rumble as he watched the nearby buildings shake, the leaves of the trees rustle, and people running this way and that. Produce fell from market stalls, and the vendors scrambled to gather their wares. Now came another sound, something different, a high-pitched screeching that stopped suddenly and was replaced by a whistling noise. The noise grew in intensity, and he realized it was very quickly getting closer. In seconds, it had become a great whooshing and thudding noise, and then he saw the ball of fire coming directly towards his window. That was the last he knew. The fiery hell took him where he stood, so hot that it immediately turned his body into ashes that were blown backwards into the room. Frederick's house was now just rubble, and it had taken the two buildings either side with it. The terrace was aflame, and small explosions from various combustible materials had sent shards of brick, wood, and glass some distance away. Many other buildings in the city were attacked in the same way and now also lay in ruins. Properties blazed with fires that spread rapidly to their neighbors or set fire to trees and bushes along the streets. People were running, some covered in blood from various injuries, while others lay in the street with broken bones caused by falling debris. And here and there the bodies of the dead, men, women, and children, lay motionless. Through this mass of burning debris, a man dressed in a long black hooded robe emerged. The hood of the robe was pulled down as protection against the falling ashes, some of which still burned and now landed on the arm of his clothes, sending a small blue stream of smoke into the air, which he quickly slapped out with a curse. The sound of the woman's painful moans made him stop and turn. He could not see anyone but was sure the sounds were very near. He listened closely. Yes, there it was. Taking several steps into the crumbling ruins that had recently been a house, he noticed an arm laying limply over some smoldering wood, the fingers wriggling slowly with effort. Pulling the debris away, he noticed the woman and was shocked at what he saw. The skin was peeling from her face and neck, which were burnt and blackened. Blood caked her hair, and one eye was closed, bruised, and bleeding. Looking down the length of her body, he could see the metal spike that impaled her and knew her death was imminent. Taking one hand as he knelt beside her, he knew this was all he could do to offer her some comfort. Placing the other hand on her head seemed to make her feel less pain, and she looked up at him with her one open eye. "Frederick, my love, is that you? I thought you had surely died." She gave a slight smile. "My love, to see you at the end is all I could have hoped for." A lonely tear, streaking the soot as it flowed down her cheek. Caro breathed a long, slow breath outward and was gone, her hand going limp in the stranger's grip. The man stood up and turned to look at the destruction around him. Fires burned everywhere, and now a different rumbling was heard, that of 1,000 horse soldiers riding to slaughter any surviving Stroika's citizens. There would be no mercy here. for this city had denied giving power to the invading force, and it would now seek its revenge. This invading army had woven fear and destruction across the land for 2 years now, and its conquest was almost complete. "Lord," a voice shouted. A tall soldier dressed in leather armor and carrying a large two-handed sword came running towards the hooded stranger. The man lowered the hood of his robe, revealing long black hair that was held back by a silver band. "We cannot hold them here, Lord. We have fallen back to the inner city." After taking a few breaths, adding, "We cannot win, they are too strong. The whole city is almost theirs." General Corvius looked straight into the other man's eyes and said, "I am the last commanding officer. All the rest are dead, and the men are scattering. There is nowhere for them to hide or run to." Corvius waved a hand in an arc around him, pointing out the devastation caused by the fireballs as the town's timber and stone houses had been set ablaze. It was plain that the invaders did not need the buildings, but merely wanted to enslave or kill the population. This city, the strongest in the land, was being made an example of so that others would surrender without a fight. "It's over. No one can stop them now," Corvius raged through gritted teeth. "The Bastion army is heading to Dreslan. Only Varsel stands in its way now, and then what?" The stranger's almond-shaped eyes opened wider as he considered his own question. "Of course, Taal." "Taal? What could she want with Taal?" Corvius asked. "There's nothing there but the ruins of a long-forgotten castle and an old tower." "I have to go to Corvius. I will bring reinforcements. You need to slow the Bastion down as much as you can until it arrives. Fall back to Varsel if you can. Do not allow them to reach Taal." Corvius did not respond. An arrow now protruded through his neck from back to front, blood trickled down onto his chest, and the wheezing sound of a dying man's last breath issued forth. The archer notched another arrow and went to take aim, but his second target was no longer there. The hawk circled, its eyes peering into the mist below. Without hesitation, it swooped down through the white swirling veil that masked the field, catching its prey in razor-sharp talons before rising skywards again with a shrill. Its eyes blazed with the fire of the perfect hunter, while the dull, dead eyes of the rabbit dangling below stared outward and saw nothing more. After a while, the noise had ceased, as had the cries and the screams. The sound of metal clanging against metal, the dull thud of wood on wood, and the hollow-sounding thump of hooves were now all gone. A few voices cried out for companions to come to their aid, or with a mournful sadness at what had passed. The green grass was now glazed with a hint of red, and the clear water had been mudded from the many feet that had ran through it. The two men, one sitting and one kneeling, neither saw nor heard the end of the rabbit's innocent life from a short distance away. "Take the sword, take it to Ariel," Sean ordered. "I cannot," replied Philippe, "for without the sword there can be no king, and without a king the land will die." "It is not a sword that makes a king, but his actions and deeds, the power of his heart, and the love for his people." Sean looked deep into Philippe's eyes. "It is time for a new king. Now that evil has been driven from the land, there is no need for the sword. Now do as I say, then go forth and find such a man. Be his right hand, his friend, his confidant, as you have been mine." "But sire, you are that man. I will fetch help and have your wounds tended, then we will." "No," Sean spoke firmly. "My time is over. I was not born to live my years peacefully, but to bring peace and then move on. My work here is done." Blood was now seeping down the side of Sean's armor where his breastplate had been pierced. 6 inches of the spear's shaft still lay embedded in his chest, fixed by the barbs on the spear's blade. "Go now, while there is still time." Philippe took the sword and mounted his horse, and with one last look back, he spurred it on. The gray mare galloped gracefully despite the lengthy battle she had endured. Several times she had to leap over the prone bodies of comrades and enemies alike. Here and there, the results of battle could be seen. Broken weapons and dead or dying soldiers appeared as monuments to the cruelty of war. No longer did the men scream out their brave war cries. Now their screams were of the damned. The utterances of last words and curses at victorious enemies. As Philippe drove his horse onward, his eyes were clouded with tears. How had it come to this? This perfect land of justice and peace had turned in on itself and now seemed more like a nightmare world of pain and suffering. The sun was setting when he arrived at a lake, and it cast a warm glow over the still waters and through the mists, giving the effect of a hazy dream. Philippe took the sword and looked at it. He had never been up close enough to examine it before. The blade was a curious color, not silver as Philippe had expected, more a pale gold. Rune symbols had been carved down its length, and at the tip was carved a dragon's head, its tongue snaking out to form the sharp, deadly point. Philippe's mind turned back to Sean. How could he have left his friend to die alone? He turned his horse and headed back to the battlefield. He could not allow Sean to die, not now, after all they had been through and knowing that evil had been forever driven from the land. Now it was time for Sean to rule the kingdom once more, and for the country to return to its former glory. Sean rolled to one side, tried to get comfortable, but could not. He knew he would not live long enough for Philippe to get help. He knew his time had come. Theodore's spear had pierced his armor and body so deeply that it had been driven all the way through and out of the other side. His mind played over again the last time he had seen the Queen. How he had forgiven her weakness and set her free. How he had hoped to see her again just once more before he died. His eyes misted over with droplets of water, or perhaps sweat from his brow, or maybe they were tears. He could no longer tell. His mind no longer worked on a physical level, and slowly he sank deeper into his dream, down to the darkest levels where fear and dread lay waiting to consume the weak and where the strong must fight to awaken. A thick mist swam around the scenes and figures he imagined. His mind drifted, like a leaf on a stream. It wandered this way and that and bobbed up and down. Visions appeared. Warriors, Saville, then Giselle, a figure in black, Lorraine, Philippe, Theodore, David, and again the figure in black. "Sean," the black shape called softly. "Don't you know me? Sean, wake up." The black shape drifted for a moment, shimmered, then stopped close to Sean. Sean shook his head, trying to clear his vision. The mist over his eyes slowly cleared, and the black shape became the outline of a man. His face came next, framed by long black hair held back by a silver band. The face was long and pointed, as was the nose. A big smile crossed the face, and two large eyes glistened like amber jewels. "Well," the face inquired. Sean pulled himself upright and then winced with pain as he remembered the spear in his breast. It took a few seconds for his mind to register that there was now no pain. He looked down. The spear had gone, as had his armor and clothes. He now lay in a bed of warm linen. A fire raged in a hearth opposite his bed, the flames licking upwards and the heat reaching out and warming his hands and face. The walls of the room were hung with tapestries depicting scenes of great gardens and wild animals, and a single window about the size of a small shield was set in one wall. The window was glazed with colored glass, depicting the sun shining over a still lake. Sean again looked down to where the spear had pierced his side. A small scar, the size of a thumbnail, was the only indication that he had been wounded. He stroked his finger on the scar and expected to feel pain, but there was just a numbness from where the wound had healed over. "What magic have you used today?" he asked, looking accusingly at the man in black. "None, only time itself," and adding after a slight pause, "and a few herbs and roots have saved you this time. You were already unconscious when I brought you here, and I thought it was too late, even for my skills. But your spirit is strong, Sean, the strongest I have ever encountered. Only your father came close." "Now there was a warrior," replied Gaius with a grin. "How long have I been here?" Questions, always the same. Gaius waged a finger at Sean. "Is it not enough that you are here?" Same old Gaius, answering a question with a question. retorted Sean. 2 months, Gaius' face suddenly lit up. But what is time? The ticking of a clock that counts down our few remaining days. He paused and looked at Sean, who tried to interrupt. What? What? Repeated Gaius. Ignoring the question, he continued. Remember what I taught you. Time is just an illusion, a measure we can use to mark off our achievements. It does not exist. You cannot touch it, smell it, or eat it. Gaius winked. This is no time for lectures, Gaius. Please just answer my questions, Sean frowned. As simply as you can, he added slowly. Oh, all right, replied Gaius. You take the fun out of everything. Where am I? Aidenval. The Isle of Aidenval. No, that place only exists in the world of men, replied Gaius. Although history will claim it is there that you. Stop! I do not want to know about the future, only the now. Sean interrupted, his mood turning sullen. Gaius turned towards the fire, warming his hands over the bright flames. The Queen, bring her to me, ordered Sean. I must see her right away. I cannot do that, Gaius said, turning his back to Sean. Cannot or will not, replied Sean. Bring her to me now, I command it. You forget, I am not yours to command. Gaius turned to Sean. Even if I were, I could not do it. Why? Surely there is nothing that the great Gaius cannot accomplish. Sean said it bitterly, with more than a hint of sarcasm. Gaius looked down and walked a few paces from the bed. She is not in this realm. I don't understand. Sean swung his legs out of the bed. Why do you talk in riddles, Gaius? What does that mean? It was the only way, with sadness now in his voice, the only way to save you. Gaius looked at Sean. If I had not brought you to another plane, then you would have died. He said this by way of explanation. And what of Jarenn? Sean asked. She would have lost you anyway. Gaius paused and took a deep breath. It is time that you realize that she is partly to blame for your present situation. How dare you? Hold your tongue, Sean shouted, as if to block out the words he refused to hear. You know I speak the truth, Sean, Gaius spoke softly. It is time to look to the future. And with that he left the room, leaving Sean alone. Sean's head sank into his hands. It was true that Jarenn had betrayed him, and in doing so, betrayed the kingdom. But could she really have been the start of his downfall? General Chrysak sat astride his huge white horse, surveying the land before him. In the distance was the city of Varsail. His black uniform contrasted with the horse's coat, with a single gold stripe down each arm and shiny gold buttons and clasps holding it in place. The scabbard of his sword was wrapped in gold twine, and the pommel shone as the sun glanced off it. However, this was no ornament. It had shed more than its share of blood over the years. Chrysak has been raised in the aristocracy. He knew his worth and his direction in life. His wife was held in high esteem by those around the queen. The queen herself, though, was another matter entirely. The tall, beautiful, ivory towers and picturesque gardens were known throughout Dresslan as some of the finest architecture ever designed. Chrysak himself came from a city steeped in history and beauty, and he appreciated fine things. It made him melancholy to think of his home and family, whom he had not seen in over a year, and the thought of crushing this city and returning home gave him a reason to fight this one last battle. He put a hand into the air and motioned for his standard bearer to ride up next to him. Behind him, 20,000 men waited for the signal to move forward. At the border of Dresslan, 2 men looked towards the oncoming army. Dahl gave a wry smile to Saris. They seem a little underpowered, only 5 to 1. I am disappointed. Let's hope the long journey here has worn them out, old man. I have no wish to die today. Saris was not in a jovial mood. Unlike Dahl, he did not relish battles, even though he had fought many and was a skilled warrior. Always aware that death could spring upon you from any angle and at any time. He was alert, with eyes that darted here and there looking for the next attack. He gave a nod towards the enemy. The legendary General Chrysak, he has led his army to many victories. Saris looked along the ranks of the opposing army and then back at his. They are many Daegal. We have fought against such odds before, but that was so long ago, and we had fully trained warriors then. We have had time to prepare, at least, unlike the other cities that have fallen. I am sure our forces will have a few surprises in store for General Chrysak. Chrysak could see the Varsal defenders in the distance. He was quite impressed with their numbers. No one so far had put up this much resistance, and in fact, his shock tactics had proved so good that many cities had not even put up a fight, preferring to accept the invaders rather than be killed and their homes destroyed. The tactics were simple. The first few cities had been destroyed, their inhabitants killed or maimed, women taken as salves or worse, and their children slaughtered. Eventually, a few of the captives had been allowed to escape and were given time to run to the next city for shelter, where they could tell of the horrors to come. As the Bastion army approached these cities, the rulers were more than eager to send out envoys to beg for leniency and for the citizens to be spared. Of course, this was done as long as these cities were handed over to the rule of the invaders. Fear had spread quickly across the land, and Chrysak's army had fought far fewer battles than had been told. Such is the power of rumor. The marching had been long and tiring, though, and Chrysak was happy that, at least, it was at an end. Stroika had been harder than he expected, but it had fallen all the same, even if he had had a little unrequested help. Chrysak was intrigued by the green flags flying at several places in the ranks of the Varsal army. The city's colors were a red shield with a golden cross on it. Maybe they had some new allies, but whoever they were, they would fall like all the rest. Chrysak signaled his army to move forward and begin the attack. This shouldn't take long. The Varsal army was lined up in several ranks in a long line with their backs to the city walls, where they were trapped with no chance of escape and seemed too spread out to offer any solid defense. Chrysak's cavalry were to go in first with the intention of breaking up the defending lines into smaller sections, and his foot soldiers would then rush in and finish them off as always. The cavalry rode battle-hardened horses that would not be afraid of any noise or swords being waved around them. Chrysak unsheathed his sword and held it high into the air. This was the sign his men had been waiting for, and their horses were spurred on into a gallop, the riders already brandishing long swords ready for the slaughter and sending clouds of dust up behind them. The infantry ran as best they could to keep up, but were left far behind. As the horses neared, the Varsal lines suddenly moved closer together, their shields touching and forming a solid wall. This did nothing to deter the onrushing cavalry, who could just ride through it or jump over it. With only seconds to spare, the front row of the Varsal army knelt down and picked up the 3-meter-long spears that had been lying next to them hidden in the long grass. The lines behind them did the same but continued standing. The wall of shields was now like a deadly porcupine, and the riders had no chance to stop their horses in time. The horses charged onto the spears. Some tried to stop but couldn't, throwing their riders, while others reared and fell sideways, and all were either impaled on the spears or had their legs cut out from under them by the swords of defending troops. The riders were hacked to death by the massed ranks of defenders as they fell, and even those that tried to stand had little chance of survival. The infantry, having seen what had happened, began to slow, taking stock of the scene before them and not wishing to run headlong into the spears. Chrysak, enraged, waved his sword around in circles above his head with the hope of encouraging the attack. "Charge forward now, finish them," he shouted above the noise of the startled soldiers, who now were only edging towards the enemy. "Cowards!" Chrysak pushed his horse through the ranks of his men. With me, see how they are kneeling now, they know it is useless to resist." Indeed, the front 3 rows of the Varsal army had sunk to their knees, but not in fear. Behind them, 4 rows of archers had strung their bows and now shot arrows high into the air. With a high-pitched whistling sound, they turned and arced down, the sky filled with long streaks of dark wooden death that rained down on the attacking army. The Bastion army turned and tried to run but couldn't. There were too many of them packed closely together, and now the arrows cut through them, killing hundreds in the first wave. The second wave now came, and more Bastion soldiers fell to the ground dead or wounded. The soldiers at the back of the Bastion army were scattering, allowing others to start their escape, but it didn't last long. Appearing from behind them now came another force. 1,000 mounted men dressed in green silks with lances and swords came from either side of the rear of the battlefield. Cutting off their escape route, they scythed through the desperate Bastion infantry, some of whom had dropped their weapons as they ran, while others were too shocked to offer any resistance. Now the Varsal army ran at their attackers, and a fierce battle ensued. Waves of arrows, along with the horse soldiers, had killed thousands of enemy soldiers, and the tide had turned. The Bastion army was now staring at defeat.